Hey there, everyone. It's Camber here with the Yo Pro No. I am excited to introduce you all to Tori Levine today, 27-year-old marketing operations Twitter for the Twitter developer platform. So I'm going to have you explain all of that in a second. But Tori is currently in New York City and is in her lovely new apartment. So Tori, thanks so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Camber. Happy to be here.
So I always like to start off interviews by sharing how we were connected. And Tori and I go way back, actually, like way, way back. I met Tori. She was a year ahead of me at Furman University when we were in school. And I actually met her at orientation. So even before I got on campus, really. And so Tori and I know each other for a long time. And I was really excited to reach out to her and interview. So Tori, why don't we get started with just a brief background on you today? So, kind of short to the point, and then we'll really dive into the details of how you ended up at Twitter.
Perfect. So, as Camber said, I went to Furman University, which was awesome, and I was super involved on campus. So, was able to meet a ton of different people there. Was an orientation staff and admissions ambassador, and got connected to some of our alumni. And one of them actually was the CEO of a startup in Atlanta, and so I went there directly after college. And it's been a wild ride. I knew I wanted to be in marketing, and was able to kind of carve my own path, which was really awesome. And that's kind of how I got into the marketing operations sphere, because I didn't even know it existed prior. So
Yeah.
some really great opportunities comes from working at a startup right out of college. And I was able to leverage that and kind of get me to where I am today.
Right. And so there's a lot of things I want to talk about today in this interview, but one thing that you had mentioned kind of triggered my memory a little bit. I remember when I saw you last was in Atlanta. So it was, during your first job. And I remember you were able to leverage some stuff. And so talk about that experience, briefly, but for people who are listening or watching, what might that look like? And if I remember correctly, you really did carve your own path and you kind of held your own. Like you were doing a lot at an early age and an early stage in your career. So walk us through that process.
Yeah, so I was connected to Mark Metz, who is the CEO of Relatech today, but at the time it was Relis Technologies and Relis Cloud. And so I was connected to him. He was a Furman alumni. And what was really great is that he was like, yeah, come in for an interview, was interviewed, awesome, job offer, gets my first day of work. And I find out, hey, we thought that he hired you to be an intern, but you're a full-time employee. So what that meant is I got to kind of just like create my own job. So that was awesome. And I started as a marketing assistant at the age of 22 there. So it was right out of college. I started in June, graduated in May, really, really fast. But what was awesome was when I got in there, since they didn't have everything specifically laid out, they had some things and some great things laid out. But since they didn't have every like single point of what I was going to be doing laid out, I was able to be like, hey, at Furman, I ran social media. I was really good at that, which led me into like taking over our sales force and really understanding how the metrics behind our social media worked. And what was awesome is that within 6 months I was promoted, and then within 6 months from that I was pretty much running the team. I was a marketing manager, and we didn't have a CMO. I reported directly to our president, and was able to kind of help shape the strategy and guidance behind our marketing team. And not being at a startup, I wouldn't have been able to do that. I really started to understand what the numbers looked like, and nobody had been able to do that for Relis yet. So it was a whirlwind experience, because within the first 2.5 years that I was there, we were actually acquired. And so I was able to help with all of the acquisition and making sure that things were integrated correctly, but also like able to help with some of the comms behind the acquisition, and was able to put that under my belt, as well as like crazy things like launching websites. And I've launched like 4 websites for Relis, and being able to break out Relis Technologies and Relis Cloud. I was a part of that. So that was a long-winded way of saying at a startup, I was able to just kind of create my own career and also find out what I hated. Like, I think people don't talk about that enough. Like, yes, you know what you like, but it's more important to be like, hey, I did this. I was bad at this. Yeah. I was not good at it. I'm not great at writing content. And I know that. And that's how I kind of got on the operations side.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that allowed me the opportunity to fail fast and to understand like, hey, I'm not good at this. I need someone to support me here, but I can do X, Y, and Z. And that's what I was able to do in the startup.
Very important to figure out. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I think that is something that's not widely talked about. So thank you for sharing that. So, all right, so you had this crazy, unreal experience almost at a very early stage of your career. And then you jump to one of the biggest companies in the world. So, and one of the most, successful companies, some would argue. So tell us about Twitter, in this, especially in this day and age, here we are in 2021, and there's so much being said about Twitter and these big tech companies.
Yeah. So what was really, really interesting is that when I was going from CloudReach at the time after we were acquired to Twitter, I was in the interview process and we were talking about different operations and building all of these things and really connecting the pipes, understanding leads and things of that nature. And Twitter is so well known that the phones have always rang. People are always trying to do things with Twitter. But some of that stuff just wasn't connected. They had never had a marketing operations person on our Twitter developer platform team. And so it was kind of like going from a startup to a startup, which was awesome because Twitter is an amazing organization. Like I can't say it enough. Like they tell people to come and be like their full self at work, and you never feel like you have to be super buttoned up. I'm friends with my coworkers. Like it's just an awesome opportunity to be able to work there. But you're making a huge impact on the world. The whole thing is that we're feeding the public conversation and we're letting people have that. And that's what our platform is. And over the past year, it's been tumultuous. There's a lot going on politically. There's a lot going on in everybody's life. There's a lot going on with the pandemic. No one has ever experienced anything like this. And it's cool to be a part of that conversation. And something that the Twitter developer platform side of the house does is we actually build on Twitter. So we're building things like bots and things of that nature that are applications that can actually help people. So a perfect example of this is one of the developers, and it's also open. So like anyone can build on it. So a developer that doesn't work at Twitter built this incredible application that connects people in India to resources as COVID is really bad there. So like they can get hospital beds, they can understand where oxygen is, and it really connects city by city so that people can get those things that you need. And I think what's awesome is you can see the good in social media that way. You can see the impact it can make on the world and the social impact it can really make. Because it's been an interesting time to be working in the social media realm, but it's been a blast. And I think too, what's interesting is Twitter's only 4,000 employees. So like we are keeping up with people that have, over 200,000 employees. Like Google and Facebook are massive, and Twitter is still this kind of like tight knit community, which I think is really awesome.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because literally as soon as I said, one of the biggest companies, I did a mental check because what I meant by that was really, it has a huge imprint. Like it really, because it is in the ranks of Facebook and Google, and because it is this big tech platform. And so I'm glad you clarified that. But in my head, I don't know if you could see it on my face, I was like, why did I say that? But it's true.
No, and the thing is, like, it's honestly, when you think of it, you just think of it as this big imprint. And that's exactly what it is. And it's even more empowering to see that, like, not that many people, like, if in the grand scheme of things, not that many people are directly related and work directly for this company. And it just kind of shows you like a startup can do anything, because if you get the right people in there and you have them in the right positions, like people are ready to go. They're ready to take off. And it's just finding the best talent too. So it's a really cool opportunity. I love working at Twitter, and it's
I'm so glad. And remind us how long you've been there now.
Yeah, so I started in 2019, so December of 2019. So I've been here about a year and a half, which has been awesome.
And you also, I think most people have probably heard this by now, Twitter employees are welcome to work remote full-time now. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we never have to go back in. One of our big OKRs or goals is to be able to have a decentralized workforce. So the way that Jack Dorsey is thinking about this is, hey, people in Africa are using our platform, but we don't have anybody there. Why don't we have anybody there? We don't know like how we can support them better. So I think it's a really big platform to be able to do that. And since we're decentralizing the workforce, we don't only want people in San Francisco and New York, so that we can be a better representation of a global platform. And so I'm going to go back. I love the office. I'll probably go back like 2 or 3 days a week. But in reality, like it's awesome that I don't really have to worry about where I am as long as I can get access to a computer and be the best version of myself
Right,
as an
be
employee
present.
anywhere in the world, then go for it. Like, go and do it. Why not? And I think that's really empowering and shows that they trust their employees too.
It does. It really does. And I love that concept, that you guys don't need to just be in New York and San Francisco. Like that's not representative of the world,
Mhm.
and you're serving the world. So I
Yeah.
love that. And it's very clear to me that you're so happy where you are. So tell us a little bit more about what that day to day looks like for you. So people who might be interested in your industry and your role one day, your field. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my day to day is very interesting. No day looks the same. So I run all of our marketing operations for Twitter developer platforms. So that can be anything from helping with our vendor management and making sure that, like, hey, our creative agency that we work with is doing things the correct way. I'm helping them prioritize things, really the voice of our team to help make sure that relationship is working with all of our vendors. So working with that, as well as like surveying vendors, things of that nature, making sure we're bringing the right people in. I also own the budget. So I help make sure that, like, here's how things are shaping up. Here's making sure that we're using it intelligently, and we're really making it worth it, and like using every dollar to its fullest.
Mhm.
As well as like the typical things of building reporting and dashboarding, building tools for our team. So I actually run our onboarding program specifically for Twitter developer platform, which is called Glide School. So I was able to build like a huge resource hub for that, as well as like I've just done a lot of big projects like that to make sure that our information is easy to send out. I run our internal newsletter so that people outside of the Twitter developer platform understand what we are doing and what we're building,
Nice.
because we don't want it to be a dark hole. We want people to know, like, this is an awesome part of Twitter that we should be leveraging more.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, so I do a lot of different things. I like to think of myself as the
Young
arranger.
professional. That's just kind of the mold.
Yeah, people like come to me and I can help them figure out who they should be speaking to about what. And I'm kind of this nice flex tool that I work with all different parts of our organization and get
Yeah.
connected past Twitter developer platform across Twitter, which I love,
Mhm.
and really learn from other teams too.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think it's really reflective of a lot of different industries. Like I try to share with the audience that this is normal to probably wear a lot of hats,
Mhm.
whether you work for like full time. I work full time for a nonprofit and that has 4 employees, and I wear a lot of hats, but you work for a company that has 4,000 employees and you wear a lot of
Yeah,
hats. So it can be across the board. I think
exactly.
it's important to share. So, one thing I always like to ask my interviews is what has been a hardship for you? So, we've talked a lot about really positive things, which I'm really happy that you've had a positive experience, but
Yeah.
tell us about a hardship that you've experienced as a young professional, whether it was at Twitter or your first job, and how did you grow from that?
Yeah, so I'll talk about something that happened at Relis. So, we went through that acquisition that I spoke about, and I think it's understanding that cultures change and that's okay. And that when you are growing as a company, change is good. And I think that is for any company. So, for example, like, we were acquired by CloudReach and it's great. The company is awesome, but things change and you go to a different office, you do different things, you're working with different people, and understanding that, like, a shift in culture sometimes is a good thing and it gets you put on the right path. And a lot of times you go through organizational changes and structure changes, and you're going to work with different people, and your bosses are going to change, and your direct teammates are going to change, and sometimes out of your control. Roll with it. Like, I think it was really hard for me, just like I was so attached to Relis, and understanding, like, hey, this is a good thing. You're being exposed to, like, a huge company now. We were about 1,000 employees at CloudReach when I was there, but it was London based, so I was able to travel to London and meet our British team, and like, it was just a really incredible experience. But in the moment, I was so ingrained with, like, oh, but we're not the same anymore, and
Right.
that's fine, and that's good. That's how you grow as a young professional. You should want to be exposed to more and more people that can teach you more and more things. And I think it was really difficult in the moment for me to realize that.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I'm glad that you were able to put a spin on that, eventually once you took a pause and realized that this actually is a good thing. So, wrapping up the interviews, I am mindful of our time. I want to ask a few more questions. One of which is very important. It's important to talk about, what happens outside of the office because you don't just work. So tell us a little bit about that. What do you like to do? What do you like about being a young professional, and what do you do outside of the office?
Yeah, so I think so our office is great because we get a lot of food and stuff like that, which is like the perks are amazing at Twitter. But outside of the office, I live in New York City now. And so I actually moved to New York right before the pandemic for Twitter, which like I wanted to be in New York anyway. My brother and my sister are here. My parents are up here a lot. So like it was kind of like coming home.
Mm-hmm.
But when I'm outside of the office, I love to invest in the community around me, whether that's friends, family, my dog, whatever it is. And what's awesome is New York is a place where people are trying to meet other people, is how I've experienced it at least.
Mm-hmm.
So, I bring a friend and then four other people are bringing friends, and you have a whole new community to meet and to not even network in, but just to connect. And I think that's what networking is, just connecting with others and understand what they do and where they're coming from. But like if I'm not doing anything for my professional life, I'm usually walking my dog. I live right by Battery Park, so like I'm taking her through the park and taking her to this huge dog park there, hanging out with my friends and my boyfriend and going and doing a lot of fun things like going to the Mets or the Yankees games. We live right by Governor's Island now, so it's fun to go and take city bikes around there. So I like to be active and outside normally. With just people that I enjoy and I love to connect with. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
usually with my dog.
Right. I mean, it's great that it's dog friendly where you are.
Exactly.
So, well, that's great. Thank you. I love hearing about that because, like I said, you can't always be working.
Mhm.
And so, the last thing I'll ask today, what last minute words of advice would you share with the audience that is listening in today?
Um, so I'll give two pieces of advice. One is take a risk. I didn't know anything about the technology world when I started at Relish. I didn't really know anything about marketing. I really just knew about social media marketing. I knew that I was good at looking at the numbers, and that was pretty much it. Take the risk. Imposter syndrome, everybody has it, and that's fine. Just be confident in yourself. And it's okay to have doubts in yourself. Like that's completely normal. And you're a young professional. You should. If you don't, you probably have other issues. But that being said, take the risk and go and experience something new. The second thing is like along that note, apply for jobs. I never thought that I would get a job at Twitter.
Mhm.
I did. So fun fact for me is the only places I've ever interviewed are Relish and Twitter. So I just like off a whim was like, saw this job opening, was like,
Yeah.
I'm a head of marketing operations at a startup right now. Like I might as well just like apply. I applied. The next day I had an interview.
Right.
So like you really never know what's going to happen. Don't think it's a pipe dream. Like do it now.
You can do it.
Yeah. And I started my career at Twitter at 26, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And if I would have doubted myself then and just like not thrown my resume out there, I wouldn't be here. So
Right.
definitely just apply. You never know.
You
Seriously.
never know. I love that message. And, congrats on having such a successful first few years out of school. And, I'm excited to see where your career goes next. So thanks for joining us today, Tori.
Thanks, Camber.